New York City, early morning, October. 42 floors above the street, a man stands at a window, still quiet. The kind of quiet that belongs to men who have built empires and learned that silence is its own form of power. Below him, the Hudson moves south in the gray October light, slow, indifferent, ancient. The city is already awake. He is not yet aware that his morning is already over. On the 38th floor, a corridor, fluorescent light. Steel carts lined against the wall. A man in a gray suit, no name badge, no hesitation, reaches into his jacket, a small brown bottle. 4 careful drops into a white porcelain cup. His lips move while he counts, then the napkin, then the pocket. Then he picks up the cup and walks. Somewhere in that same building, a 10-year-old boy watches from behind a cart. He sees everything. And he makes a decision that most grown men in that hallway would not have made.
There is a certain kind of morning that feels like it has always existed. Not just today, not just this particular Tuesday in October, but like it has been here exactly like this for years. The same gray light coming off the Hudson, the same slow bend of the river around the lower edge of the city, the same thin curl of steam rising from a white porcelain cup on a marble table near the window. Elliot Marsh had stood in this exact spot, at this exact window, on this exact day of the week for 9 years. 42 floors above the street, the city laid out beneath him like something he had built himself, which in some ways he had. Not the buildings, not the bridges, but the version of the city that mattered to a man like him. The boardrooms, the balance sheets, the quiet agreements made over dinner that changed the shape of industries by morning. He was 71 years old. His hair had gone the color of good steel. His beard, which he had worn for the past 12 years, had gone the same way, a neat, close-trimmed gray that his late wife Eleanor had once described as distinguished, and which he had privately suspected, she said, only because she had grown tired of asking him to shave it. He missed her every morning, not in a dramatic way, not in the way people described grief in books as a wave or a storm or some other violent thing. He missed her the way a man misses a habit he didn't know he had until it was gone. A small, persistent awareness of an absence. A space at the edge of things that had once been filled and was now not, and that he had learned to navigate around without thinking about it too directly. The way you learn to navigate around a piece of furniture that has been removed from a room you have lived in for 30 years. She had been gone 5 years. The coffee had been arriving at 8:14 every Tuesday morning for 9 years. He had never once looked up when it appeared. He was on the phone with Singapore when it arrived today. The call had ended 4 minutes ago. The coffee was still there on the marble table beside the window, exactly where it always was. The steam thinning now, but not yet gone. The smell of dark roast and something faint underneath it. Something almost like cardamom, but not quite, drifting across the pale morning light of the office. Elliot was still looking at the river. He was thinking about the board meeting on Thursday. He was thinking about the acquisition in Phoenix that had stalled for the 3rd time in 2 months. He was thinking about a conversation he'd had on the plane coming back from Singapore the night before with Stuart Aldrin, who had sat in the seat beside him for 11 hours, and who had been for 9 of those years the most trusted person in Elliot Marsh's professional life. Stuart had seemed tired on the flight, more than the usual travel fatigue. He had fallen asleep before the meal service and had not woken until they were 40 minutes from landing. He had said very little on the ride from the airport. He had taken a car ahead of Elliot's at 6:20 in the morning, saying he had an early meeting, and Elliot had nodded and not thought much of it, because Stuart Aldrin was always the first one in and the last one out, and that had always been one of the things Elliot respected most about him. He was still thinking about all of this. The Phoenix acquisition, the board meeting, the tired look on Stuart's face when he heard the voice. It was so quiet that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. 4 words, coming from the direction of the door. "Check your coffee, sir." Elliot Marsh did not turn around immediately. He was a man who had built a career, and before that a life, on not reacting to things too quickly. On giving himself the 2 or 3 seconds it took to understand what he was actually dealing with before he moved. It was a habit that had served him well in 40 years of business, and had cost him something he knew in the parts of life that were not business. Eleanor had told him once, not unkindly, that he treated every room like a negotiation. He had not disagreed. He turned around slowly. The boy was standing in the doorway. He was perhaps 10 years old. He was small for his age, or maybe he just seemed that way, because the doorway behind him was the kind of heavy glass door that made everyone who came through it look smaller. He had both hands resting on the frame, one on each side, as if he needed it for support. His shirt was navy blue, faded with a small tear near the hem that someone had tried to mend with thread that didn't quite match. His shoes were clean. The toes were worn down to almost nothing. He was not moving. He was watching the marble table near the window. Not Elliot, the table. "What did you say?" Elliot asked. The boy's eyes moved to his face. They were steady in a way that Elliot did not expect. Not the eyes of a child caught somewhere he shouldn't be. Not frightened. Not mischievous. Something else entirely. Something that reminded Elliot in a way he could not immediately explain of men he had known in the early years of his career. Men who had come from hard circumstances and who had learned very early that the wrong word said the wrong way in the wrong room could end everything. Men who chose their moments carefully because they understood the cost of choosing wrong. "Please don't drink it, sir," the boy said, a little louder this time. "Just don't drink it." Elliot looked at the cup, then he looked at the boy. He set the cup down. He had not been about to drink it. He hadn't even picked it up yet. But the act of setting it down, of making the gesture deliberate and visible, felt like the right thing to do. A way of saying without words that he was listening. "How did you get up here, son?" The boy didn't answer the question. He was still watching the cup. "The man who brought it," he said. "I saw him this morning, in the hallway outside the kitchen on 38. He paused, gathered himself. He had a small bottle. He poured something into the cup. Then he wiped the bottle with a napkin and put it in his inside pocket. Then he carried the cup down the hall toward the elevator. The words came out carefully, measured. The way a person speaks when they have been rehearsing something in a stairwell for the better part of an hour, trying to get it right before they say it to the person who needs to hear it. Elliot didn't move. He felt something shift in the region of his chest. Not panic. He was not a man who panicked. Something more precise than that. A sudden and complete rearrangement of everything he had assumed to be true about the past 45 minutes. He looked at the cup again. The steam had almost stopped now. The surface of the coffee was still, dark and quiet and ordinary looking. The way everything that is about to harm you looks before it does. "Which man?" Elliot said quietly. "What did he look like?" The boy thought before he answered. He did not rush it. "Tall," he said. "Dark hair, gray at the temples. He was wearing a gray suit, not a black one. His watch was on his right wrist, not his left, and the face of it was black. He didn't have a name badge. Everyone else in that hallway had one." He paused again. "That was the first thing I noticed. That's why I followed him." Elliot looked at the boy for a long moment. He was running the description through everything he knew about this building, about the people in it, about the morning so far. He came up with nothing immediate. There were 43 people who worked on this floor on any given day. He could name perhaps 8 of them without consulting a calendar. The coffee had arrived this morning the way it always arrived, appearing beside his elbow while he was on a call, placed there by hands he had never thought to identify. 9 years. He had never once looked up. "What is your name?" Elliot asked. The boy hesitated for only a moment. "Theo," he said. "Theo Wynn." Elliot repeated it, not out loud, just in the part of his mind where important things were kept. "Theo," he said, "I want you to step inside the office. Close the door behind you. Don't run. Don't look back down the hallway. Come stand by the window with me." The boy did exactly that. He pushed the heavy glass door shut with both hands, careful not to let it close too fast. Then he crossed a long stretch of pale carpet with the particular kind of stillness that children sometimes have when they are trying very hard to be taken seriously. He came to stand beside the marble table where the cup sat untouched. Up close, Elliot could see him more clearly. The mended tear in the shirt, the scruff at the toes of the shoes, the faint smell of the lemon soap from the building's restrooms, the kind in the metal dispensers, the kind that everyone used because there was no other option. He had washed his hands before coming up here. That was what it meant. He had stopped somewhere on the way up, washed his hands with the lemon soap, because he wanted to look presentable when he told a stranger that someone was trying to kill him. Elliot felt something move behind his eyes. He did not let it show. He had built a career on not letting things show. "Theo," he said, his voice steady, I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. Slowly. Don't skip anything. When did you first see this man? The boy took a breath. His shoulders rose and fell once, then settled. About an hour ago, he said. Maybe a little more. My mom works in the cleaning crew. On 38. She brought me with her this morning because there's no school today and the babysitter canceled. She told me to sit in the break room and read my book and not bother anyone. He paused. I was reading. I was on chapter 6. I needed to use the bathroom, so I went out into the hallway, and I took the wrong turn coming back. I ended up in the catering hallway, the one near the freight elevator where they bring up the coffee and the breakfast trays. Go on, Elliot said. That's where I saw him. He was standing next to one of the steel carts, the ones with the silver lids. He had a cup in one hand, a white cup like that one. He nodded toward the table. He did not look at the cup directly. He had a small bottle in his other hand, brown, about the size of an eye drop bottle. He unscrewed the cap and poured something into the cup. He was counting while he did it. I could see his lips moving. 4 drops, maybe 5. Then he screwed the cap back on. He took a napkin from the cart and he wiped the bottle off. Then he put the bottle in his jacket, inside pocket, left side. Then he picked up the cup and walked down the hall toward the corner. There's a sign on the wall that says Executive Offices with an arrow. He followed the arrow. I followed him. I stayed back. I didn't want him to see me. He took the small private elevator at the end, the one that needs a card. He had a card. He swiped it, and the door opened and he got in. The door closed before I could see what floor he pressed. The boy stopped. He looked down at his hands for a moment. What did you do then? Elliot asked. I went back to the break room. I sat down. I tried to read my book again. A pause. I kept thinking about the bottle. I kept thinking, why would a man pour drops into a coffee cup and then wipe the bottle and hide it? People don't do that with sugar. People don't do that with milk. People don't hide what they're doing when what they're doing is allowed. He looked up at Elliot. His eyes were steady. My mom always says if something doesn't look right, it's because it isn't. So I got up. I asked the security man at the front desk on 38 what floor the executive offices were on. He said 42. He said the chairman's office. He said your name. Then I took the stairs. Elliot looked at him. The stairs, he said quietly. From 38 to 42, by yourself. Yes, sir. I didn't want to use the elevator because I thought he might still be in it. The boy paused. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. I had to stop twice on the landings. I was breathing hard. I didn't want to come in here breathing hard because I didn't want you to think I was lying. There is a moment in certain conversations, rare ones, the kind a person might have only a handful of times across an entire life, when something shifts so completely that the world you were standing in a moment ago is simply gone. Not changed. Gone. Replaced by a different one that was always there, that you just couldn't see until someone said the right words in the right sequence, and the veil came down. Elliot Marsh stood in his office on the 42nd floor of his own building and felt that shift happen. He had been standing at this window for 9 years without registering the hands that placed the coffee there. He had been running a company of 4,000 people without knowing the name of the boy who sat in the break room on 38, reading chapter 6 of a book while his mother cleaned the floors. He had been trusting the right systems and the right structures and the right people. Or so he had believed, and somewhere inside all of that certainty, a small bottle had been counted drop by drop into a white porcelain cup, and the only thing standing between him and a death that would have been written off as a heart attack was a 10-year-old boy who had decided that looking away was not something he was willing to do. Elliot thought about his father. He had been 10 years old in Pittsburgh the first time he'd walked into his father's workshop to report that something was wrong. Someone was taking equipment from the truck out back. He had seen it from the upstairs window. He had come downstairs and walked through the shop and pushed open the door of his father's office, a small room that smelled of machine oil and old paper, and he had said what he had seen. His father had not asked him if he was sure, had not told him to go back upstairs, had simply set down his pencil, stood up and said, "Show me." Elliot had never forgotten that. The not being questioned, the being believed. He crossed the carpet to his desk. He picked up the phone. He did not call building security. He did not call the police. He called a number he knew by sound rather than by sight, a number he had memorized because he had never wanted it to exist anywhere that could be found. The line picked up on the second ring. "Conrad," Elliot said, "I need you in my office now. South stairwell. Don't use the elevator. Don't speak to anyone on the way up. When you get to my door, knock twice, pause, then once more. Don't say your name." A small silence on the other end. In 11 years, Conrad Briggs had heard Elliot Marsh use this particular tone exactly 3 times. He did not ask a single question. 6 minutes, he said, and the line went quiet. Elliot set the phone down. He looked at the cup on the marble table. The steam had stopped entirely now. The surface of the coffee was perfectly still. He thought about all the Tuesday mornings in the past 9 years, the way the cup had simply appeared, the way he had never once considered that appearing and being safe were not the same thing. He turned back to the boy. Theo Wynn was standing where Elliot had left him, beside the marble table, hands at his sides. He had not moved toward the sofa. He had not touched anything. He was waiting the way that children wait when they have been raised to understand that patience is a form of respect. "Theo," Elliot said, "I want you to sit on that sofa by the bookshelf. There is a small refrigerator behind the bar. There is orange juice water and 2 small bottles of chocolate milk. You can have any of them." He paused. "You walked up 4 flights of stairs to warn a man you don't know. You don't need to do anything else for a while. Sit down, drink something." The boy walked to the sofa. He sat on the very edge of it, the way a child sits when he is not entirely sure he is allowed to be there. He did not put his feet up. He folded his hands in his lap. He waited. Elliot watched him for a moment. Then he went back to the window. The Hudson was moving the way it always moved on Tuesday mornings, dark and slow under the pale October sky. A barge was working its way south toward the docks unhurried, carrying whatever it carried, going wherever it was going. Elliot looked at the river. He thought about Singapore. He thought about Thursday's board meeting. He thought about the Phoenix acquisition that had stalled 3 times. He thought about Stuart Aldrin sitting beside him on the plane, more tired than he should have been, falling asleep before the meal service, saying very little on the drive from the airport. He thought about the early meeting that hadn't required any explanation. He looked at the river for a long time. Then he sat down at his desk and picked up a pen and wrote 5 things on a small notepad. He wrote them slowly, the way you write something when you want to make absolutely certain you have it right before you do anything else with it. Gray suit, black-faced watch, right wrist, scar near jaw, no badge. He set the pen down and looked at what he had written. Then he folded the notepad once and put it in his inside jacket pocket and waited for the knock at the door. It came exactly 6 minutes after the call. 2 knocks, a pause, 1 more. Elliot crossed to the door. He unlocked it and stepped back. Conrad Briggs came into the room the way he always entered rooms that required care, without announcement, without unnecessary movement. He was 58 years old, broad through the shoulders, silver hair cut close to the skull. He had a face that did not change much regardless of what was happening in the room around it. Elliot had seen that face in negotiations and emergencies at the edge of things that could have gone very badly and had not, and it had always looked more or less the same. Calm in the way that certain structures are calm, not because nothing is happening inside them, but because they were built to hold whatever comes. His eyes went first to Elliot, then to the cup on the marble table, then to the boy on the sofa. He did not ask. He simply looked at Elliot and waited. Elliot told him. He told him in 3 minutes what had happened in the past 20. Conrad listened without writing anything down, without asking questions, without reacting. When Elliot finished, Conrad walked to the marble table and crouched beside the cup and examined it from 3 angles without touching it. Then he stood. "I need this intact," he said quietly. "Sealed and at the lab within the hour. I have a lab. Not in this building. Results by tonight, possibly sooner." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small evidence bag. He always carried 2. Elliot had mentioned it once years ago, and Conrad had said without any irony at all that a man who carries evidence bags is a man who is prepared to remember things correctly. "Until I know what we're dealing with," Conrad said, "nothing changes on this floor. No one learns that anything happened. Not security, not your assistant, no one." "Understood," Elliot said. Conrad looked at Theo. When he spoke, his voice shifted. The same voice, but something in it opened slightly. "Son," he said, "your mother is downstairs on 38. What's her name? Nora Wynn. the boy said. Thank you. I'm going to have someone quietly let her know that you're safe and that you're here with Mr. Marsh. She won't be told why. She'll only be told that you're helping him with something and that you'll be back with her this afternoon. Is that all right? Theo nodded. Conrad turned back to Elliot. 12 minutes. I want to walk the catering hallway before anyone touches those carts. I want it to look ordinary. Then we talk. Find the man with the scar, Elliot said. Conrad met his eyes. I will. He picked up the cup with a gloved hand, slid it carefully into the evidence bag, sealed it, and walked out the way he had come, the door clicking softly behind him. The office was quiet again. Elliot stood by the window. The barge he had been watching earlier was almost out of sight, now disappearing around the curve of the river. He watched it go. He thought about the 17 companies that operated under the Marsh Capital umbrella. He thought about the board meeting on Thursday and the lawsuit filed against the medical division in April, and the acquisition he had blocked in February, and the man he had quietly pushed out of the partnership in January, Clifton Rabbe, because the numbers in Rabbe's division had not had a clean explanation, and Elliot had not been willing to wait for one. Any one of those things, none of them, or something he hadn't thought of yet. He turned from the window. Theo Wynn was on the sofa, a small bottle of chocolate milk held in both hands, the way a much younger child holds a cup. He was sitting up straight. He was watching Elliot with the same steady attention he'd had since he first appeared in the doorway. A 10-year-old boy who had taken the stairs because the elevator wasn't safe. Elliot thought again about Pittsburgh, about his father's workshop, about the door opening and his father setting down his pencil and not asking a single question. Theo, Elliot said, while we wait for my colleague, I want to ask you something. The boy looked at him. The man you saw in the catering hallway. If I showed you a photograph, could you tell me whether it was him? Theo thought about it. He did not rush. Yes, sir, he said. I think so. I saw his face from the side when he was pouring the drops, and I saw it from the front for about 2 seconds when he turned toward the freight elevator. He didn't see me because I was standing behind one of the carts. A pause. But I saw him. He had the scar on the right side of his jaw just below the ear, and his eyebrows were dark, but his hair was going gray mostly at the temples, and the watch was thick, thicker than a regular watch, with a black face. Elliot nodded slowly. He picked up the pen again. He wrote 3 more lines on the notepad. He did not show them to Theo. He simply wrote what the boy had said because some things need to exist somewhere beyond memory, in a place where they can be pointed to and verified and used. Then he put the pen down and sat in the armchair across from the sofa. For the first time that morning, he was not behind a desk. The boy was not on the other side of a room. They were 2 people sitting in a quiet space with the city laid out behind them and the river moving slowly below, and a cup of untouched coffee sealed inside an evidence bag somewhere on its way to a lab that Elliot had never needed to use before today. Theo, Elliot said, tell me about your mother. The boy's face changed in a small way. The particular way a face changes when a person is about to talk about someone they love and is trying not to make it sound too large. Her name is Nora Wynn, he said. She has worked in this building for almost 4 years. She used to work 2 jobs. She stopped the second one last year because her back started hurting. Now she just works here. He paused. She wakes up at 4 in the morning. She makes my breakfast and packs my lunch before she leaves. She gets home at 6. She makes dinner. She helps me with homework. She reads with me before bed. On Sundays, we go to church and then we go to the library. Where is your father? Elliot asked. The boy looked down at his hands. He died when I was 4. He was a bus driver. He had a heart attack while he was driving. He pulled the bus over first. He parked it. He made sure all the passengers were safe before he called for help. A silence. The doctor said if he hadn't pulled over, he might have lived, but he didn't want anyone to get hurt. Another silence. My mom keeps a picture of him by the kitchen window. She talks to it sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. Elliot looked at the boy for a long moment. He was thinking about a bus driver in an American city who had felt his heart seizing up behind the wheel and whose first thought, whose first and governing instinct, had been to pull the vehicle to a stop before anything else, to make the thing safe before he made himself safe, to put the people in his care ahead of the fact of his own dying. And he was thinking about the boy that man had left behind, who had grown up without a father in an apartment that Elliot could not picture, but could feel the dimensions of, and who had been taught by a woman who woke at 4 in the morning and read beside him before bed that if something does not look right, you do not look away. Who had found himself in a catering hallway by accident and had made a decision that most grown men in this building would not have made. Who had stopped twice on the stairwell landing to catch his breath and had kept going both times. Who had washed his hands with lemon soap before coming up because he wanted to look right when he told a stranger the truth. Theo, Elliot said quietly, when this is over, your mother and I are going to have a conversation. The boy's eyes moved to his face quickly, a flash of something close to fear. She didn't do anything wrong, sir. No, Elliot said. That is not what I mean. He leaned forward slightly. I mean that I owe her something for raising the kind of boy who walked into this office this morning. I don't know yet what that something is, but she is going to know my name the way I now know hers. Theo thought about that. Something in his shoulders settled, the small fraction they had been holding tight since he first stepped through the door. He looked back down at the chocolate milk in his hands. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved. Taxis and trucks and the particular noise of 10 million people doing 10 million things at once, all of it filtered down to almost nothing by 42 floors of glass and steel. The river was still there, bending south. The sky was the same pale gray it had been all morning, but something had changed in the room. Not the room itself. The room was the same, the long desk, the bookshelves, the pale carpet, the marble table with its empty surface where a cup had been. What had changed was the understanding inside it. The quiet, clarifying shift that comes when you realize that the version of the morning you thought you were living was not the actual morning at all. A man had counted drops into a white cup on the 38th floor of this building. A boy had watched. A boy had climbed 4 flights of stairs on his birthday because today Elliot would learn only later was the day Theo Wynn turned 10 years old. The knock came at the door at exactly the time Conrad had said it would. 2 beats. A pause. 1 more. Elliot rose from the armchair. He crossed to the door. He unlocked it and stepped back. And the next part of the morning began. Conrad had been gone for 43 minutes. He did not sit down when he came back through the door. He never sat down when there was still work moving. Elliot had noticed this about him in the first weeks after hiring him 11 years ago, and had come to understand it as a kind of physical grammar. Conrad's way of telling a room that the situation had not yet resolved itself into something that allowed for chairs. He set a slim laptop on the edge of the desk. He opened it without speaking. He turned the screen toward Elliot and toward Theo, who had set down his empty chocolate milk bottle and was sitting up straight on the sofa with his hands folded in his lap watching. Conrad pressed play. The footage was the kind of gray-green that internal security cameras always produced, not quite real, not quite artificial, like something filmed through old glass. But the hallway was clear enough. Steel carts along one wall, fluorescent light overhead. A narrow corridor that Elliot had never walked, had never had reason to walk in 9 years of occupying the building whose name was on the lease. The man appeared from the left side of the frame. Tall, dark hair, gray at the temples, gray suit. He moved with the particular economy of someone who has been in many rooms where he was not supposed to be and has learned to move through them without drawing the kind of attention that gets you remembered. He stopped beside one of the steel carts. He set down a white porcelain cup. He reached into his inside left jacket pocket and produced a small brown bottle. He unscrewed the cap. He poured. His lips moved while he counted. Then the cap went back on. The napkin came out. He wiped the bottle with 3 careful strokes, returned it to the pocket, picked up the cup, walked out of frame toward the right. The whole thing took 91 seconds. Conrad rewound it and played it again without being asked. The second time Elliot watched the man's face. At the 83rd second, something off camera, a sound, a movement near the freight elevator caused the man to turn his head briefly toward the left side of the frame. His face was visible for 2 full seconds. A straight nose, dark brows, hair going silver at the temples, and there along the right side of his jaw, just below the ear, a thin, pale line that caught the fluorescent light for just a moment before he turned away. That's him, Theo said quietly from the sofa. He did not say it loudly. He did not need to. Conrad nodded once. His name on file is Thomas Greer, he said. He came into this building 14 months ago through a third-party staffing contract for executive catering services. His background check was clean. He paused. It was also fabricated. The references on his application are real companies. The phone numbers route to a single answering service registered in Delaware, set up 6 weeks before he applied. I have the records. They were never meant to hold up to serious scrutiny. They were meant to hold up long enough. Who is he really? Elliot asked. His actual name is Victor Crane, 11 years in private security across 3 countries. He left his last position under circumstances that were not made public, but serious enough to end his career on that continent. He returned to the United States approximately 2 years ago. Conrad let a moment pass. He has been connected informally to 2 deaths that were never formally investigated as homicides. Both deaths were ruled natural causes. Both subjects were male. Both were in their 60s. Both had documented cardiac histories. The room was very quiet. In plain language, Conrad said, he is the kind of man you bring in when you need a problem to disappear cleanly. When you need a death certificate that reads heart attack and no one asks a follow-up question. Elliot looked at the frozen image on the laptop screen. Victor Crane. The man had been in this building for 14 months, had walked these hallways, had memorized the rhythm of a Tuesday morning on the 42nd floor well enough to build an entire plan around it, had known that the coffee arrived at 8:14, had known exactly what kind of man Elliot Marsh was, the kind who stood at his window thinking about board meetings and river views and never once looked up. Where is he now? Elliot asked. He left through the south service entrance at 8:22 this morning, 8 minutes after your coffee was delivered. He has not returned. His phone is off. The apartment listed on his employment file is a short-term rental in Midtown, paid in cash through January. It was vacated this morning. We have confirmation from a contact at the building. Conrad closed the laptop. He was never planning to be here when it was over. Elliot nodded slowly. He had understood that before Conrad said it, but hearing it said aloud produced a different effect than understanding it privately. It made it specific. It made it real in the way that only spoken things become real. Someone had planned this down to the exit. The camera, Elliot said, manually deleted. 6 minutes of footage replaced with a loop. Same segment of hallway, same timestamp. But if you watch carefully, the same pigeon passes the same window 3 times in 90 seconds. Whoever did it was competent, but not exceptional. The backup server retained the original. He reached into his jacket and produced a single folded sheet of paper. 9 people in this building have administrative access to the security system at the level required to pull and replace camera footage. You are one of them. I am another. He set the paper on the desk. That leaves 7. Elliot did not pick it up immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something when you already know that opening it is going to change the shape of the day permanently, and you want one more second in the version of things that existed before you did. One more second where the list is just a folded piece of paper and not yet the thing that will determine what the rest of this day looks like and in some ways, what the rest of his life looks like. Then he unfolded it. 7 names. He knew all of them. He had hired 6 himself over a span of 20 years. The 7th had come with the building when he acquired it in 2014. He knew their families. He had attended 2 of their weddings. He had spoken at the funeral of one of their fathers. He had sat across from each of them at tables where serious things were decided and had trusted based on the evidence available to him at the time that they were the right people to be sitting there. He read through the list slowly, the first name, the second, the third. The 4th name stopped him. He read it again. Then he set the paper down on the desk and looked out the window for a moment at the river at the bend of it going south at the slow gray sky above the water. Stuart Aldrin, he said. It was not a question. Conrad did not answer immediately. He gave the name the space it required. That was something Elliot had always valued in him, the understanding that certain things needed room before the response. He was on the same flight from Singapore, Conrad said. He left the airport ahead of you at 6:20 this morning. His stated reason was an early meeting. I pulled the building's entry log. He badged in at 7. He was confirmed at his desk on 40 by 7:15. The call, Elliot said. 8:13, Conrad said. 1 minute before the coffee was delivered to your office. Duration 41 seconds. The number it came from is a prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store in Wilmington 6 weeks ago. He paused. The same prepaid phone placed 2 additional calls in the past 30 days, both to the same number, both lasting longer than 30 minutes. Clifton Rabe, Elliot said. Yes. The name sat in the room between them. Clifton Rabe, 7 years as a senior partner at Marsh Capital, a man who had built a division from 40 employees to 400, who had taken 3 companies from unprofitable to exceptional, who had sat across from Elliot at more dinners and more conferences and more late evenings working through problems than Elliot could accurately count. A man who had been quietly removed from the partnership in January because the transfers in his division's accounts had not had a clean explanation. Elliot had brought it to him privately, had given him 2 weeks to produce documentation. When the documentation came back, it answered some questions and raised more. Elliot had made the call. Rabe had left with a severance package and without a scandal, which was more than the situation had required him to offer. Stewart had been in the room when Elliot made that decision. Stewart had suggested gently once that perhaps allowing Rabe to step back gradually might be preferable to a clean removal. Elliot had not agreed. Stewart had not raised it again. 6 weeks later, the prepaid phone in Wilmington had made its first call. Elliot picked up the list again. He looked at Stewart's name for a long time. He thought about the flight from Singapore. 11 hours. The window seat and the aisle seat and the meal, neither of them ate because the airline had changed the menu, and neither of them had been in the mood to negotiate with whatever the replacement was. Stewart had fallen asleep before the meal service. He had slept for most of the flight. He had been more tired than the travel alone accounted for. Elliot had noticed it and had not said anything because he had assumed it was the kind of tired that accumulated when you ran a $9 billion portfolio and you were not 35 years old anymore. He thought about the day Eleanor died. The hospital had called him at 2 in the afternoon. An aneurysm. She had been there for 6 hours before he arrived and had been unconscious for most of them, and was gone 12 minutes after he walked through the door of her room. He had sat beside her for a while after. He didn't know how long. Then he had driven himself home. The funeral was 4 days later. 40-some people came. Business associates, a few old friends, Eleanor's sister from Charlotte. By 6 that evening, everyone had gone except for Stewart Aldrin, who had stayed in the kitchen, who had found a bottle of Elliot's Better whiskey in the cabinet beside the stove, who had brought 2 glasses to the sitting room, who had sat across from Elliot without saying anything, just sat there for more than an hour until Elliot had finally told him he should go home to his family. Stewart had stood up, set his glass down, put on his coat, and said only, "Call me if you need anything. Anytime. I mean that." And he had gone. Elliot had trusted that man with every significant decision this company had made for 9 years, with the numbers behind the numbers, with the things that could not be put in writing, with the architecture of a business that was in many ways the structure inside which Elliot's entire life operated. He set the list back down on the desk. "I want his movements for the past 6 months," Elliot said. "Every meeting, every flight, every dinner this company paid for, every personal expense he filed. I want the vendor contracts his division approved in the same period, starting with anything touching the medical companies." "Already pulling it," Conrad said. "And Rabe. I want to know where he has been, who he has been talking to, and whether his name appears in any document that also contains the name Victor Crane. I'll need a few hours." "You have them." Conrad picked up the laptop and moved toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at Theo, who had been sitting on the sofa through this entire exchange with his hands folded and his eyes lowered, present, but careful the way a child who has been raised in places where adult conversations carry weight learns to be present without intruding. "Son," Conrad said, "your mother is going to come up in a few minutes. Someone is bringing her up quietly. When she gets here, you don't need to explain anything to her right away. Mr. Marsh will do that." "All right." Theo looked up. "Yes, sir," he said. Conrad left. The door clicked. The office was quiet. Elliot sat down in the armchair across from the sofa again, the way he had earlier, without the desk between them. He looked at the boy. Theo was watching the place where the cup had been on the marble table, the empty space it had left behind a faint ring on the stone that would be wiped clean by the end of the day and leave no record of ever having been there. "Theo," Elliot said, "how old are you today?" The boy looked at him. Something shifted in his face. 10, he said. Elliot nodded. He did not say anything else for a moment. He simply sat with that. A 10-year-old boy on his birthday who had climbed 4 flights of stairs in a building that was not his to tell a man whose name he had learned from a security guard on a different floor that something was not right. 10 years old. Does your mother know it's your birthday? Elliot asked. She made me breakfast this morning before we left, Theo said. Blueberry pancakes. She always makes them on my birthday. What time did she make them? Before 5, Theo said. Because we had to leave early. Elliot thought about Nora Wynn standing in a kitchen before 5 in the morning, making blueberry pancakes for her son because it was his birthday, and it was the kind of thing she would not let a difficult schedule take from him. The way some people carry their love in the things they actually do, not the large announcements, not the gestures that required an audience, but the things done before dawn when no one was watching and there was no one to notice except the person the love was for. He thought about Eleanor and the way she used to leave notes inside his jacket pocket on the days he had important meetings. Not long notes, sometimes just a word or two. He had found one once, 6 months after she died, in the inside pocket of a coat he hadn't worn since the previous winter. A yellow sticky note, 3 words in her handwriting. You've got this. He had stood in his closet for a while after that. The knock at the door was quiet. 2 short raps close together. Not Conrad's signal. Different. Elliot crossed to the door and opened it. Nora Wynn was standing in the hallway. She was small, smaller than he had expected, though Theo had not used the word small. She wore the gray uniform of the building's cleaning staff, pressed and straight. Her hair was pulled back in a practical knot. Her name tag was slightly crooked on her lapel. She held her hands in front of her fingers loosely interlocked, and she looked at Elliot Marsh with the kind of directness that comes from a life that has not had the luxury of looking away from things. Her eyes went past him immediately to the sofa. When she saw Theo, her shoulders dropped approximately half an inch. The breath she had been holding since the message reached her. Your son is on the 42nd floor. He is fine, please come up. Released itself in a way that was not quite visible and not quite audible, but that Elliot felt anyway, the way you feel a change in pressure. Mrs. Wynn, Elliot said, please come in. Your son is not in any trouble. I want you to sit down and I want to explain what happened this morning. She stepped inside. He closed the door. She went directly to the sofa and sat beside Theo and put her arm around him without a word. Theo leaned into her side, not dramatically, not the way a much younger child would lean, but the small, deliberate fraction that a 10-year-old boy allows himself when he is in the presence of the one person in the world he does not have to hold himself together for. Elliot sat down across from them. He told her everything. He told her the way he would have wanted someone to tell him plainly in the right order, without softening the parts that were hard and without dramatizing them either. He told her about the catering hallway and the brown bottle. He told her about Theo following the man to the elevator. He told her about the staircase and the 4 flights and the 2 stops on the landings. He told her about Conrad and the evidence bag and the lab results that were still coming. He told her about the footage from the backup server and the 91 seconds and the face that Theo had identified without hesitation. She listened without interrupting. Her hand stayed on Theo's shoulder. Her eyes stayed on Elliot's face. When he finished, she sat for a long moment looking at the floor between her feet. Then she looked up. Mr. Marsh, she said, I have raised that boy by myself for 6 years. I have done it on what this building pays me. I have done it because his father showed me before he died that you don't measure a life by how much you have. You measure it by what you leave behind in the people you love. She paused. I am not surprised that Theo came up here this morning. I am not surprised that he saw what he saw and did what he did. The only thing that surprises me is that the world finally let him be seen for it. Elliot nodded. He did not trust his voice for a moment. The desk phone buzzed. He stood and crossed to it. Conrad's voice was quiet and quick. I'm in the catering hallway now. 2 carts matching the boy's description. The backup footage is confirmed and clean. The lab called with a preliminary. The cup contained a colorless compound, nearly tasteless, not commercially available. Synthesized. In the dose present in that cup, it would have produced symptoms consistent with acute cardiac arrest within 40 to 90 minutes of ingestion. A pause on the line. There would have been no obvious indication of poisoning. The death certificate would have read heart attack. Given your age and your family history, no one would have questioned it. Elliot stood at the desk with the phone at his ear and looked out the window at the river. No one would have questioned it, he repeated quietly. No, there's more. I have the vendor contract that brought Crane into the building. It was routed through the facilities and catering procurement process 14 months ago. Standard third-party staffing agreement. One signature on the approval sheet. Elliot waited. Stuart Aldrin, Conrad said, with a handwritten note attached. 3 words. Recommend without reservation. The river moved the way it always moved, slow and dark and indifferent. How long before you have the full financial picture? Elliot asked. 2 hours, maybe less. I have Hannah's team working the vendor invoices. If the money moved through the medical division accounts, we'll find it. Keep going. There's one more thing. I ran a wider search on the prepaid phone, beyond the calls to Rabe. 2 months ago, the same phone sent a text message to a number registered to a logistics company in Delaware. The logistics company shares a registered agent with 4 other companies. One of those companies made a payment 6 weeks ago to a private account in the name of a security consultant. Crane, Elliot said. A holding name he uses. Yes, the payment was $40,000. It was the first of what appears to have been a planned 3-part arrangement. The second payment was due upon completion. The line was quiet for a moment. Elliot, Rabe didn't just approach Stuart for access. He came with a plan already built. The payment structure, the staffing contract, the camera access, the timing around your Singapore trip. This was not improvised. This was constructed over months. Elliot said nothing. Whoever built it knew your schedule, knew the Tuesday coffee routine, knew your cardiac history, knew that a heart attack at 71 would not raise questions. Elliot looked at the list still lying on his desk. The 7 names, the 4th one. How long have you and I known each other, Conrad? He asked. A pause on the other end that had nothing to do with the connection. 11 years, Conrad said. In 11 years, have I been wrong about a person the way I may be wrong about Stuart? Conrad took a moment before he answered. That was one of the things Elliot had always valued in him, the refusal to offer an easy answer when an honest one was harder. Once, Conrad said, possibly twice, but never at this level. No, Elliot said. Neither had I. He set the phone down. He turned back to the room. Nora Wynne was watching him from the sofa. She had heard enough of the call, from enough of his side of it to understand the shape of it. She did not ask questions. She simply watched him with the same directness she had shown when she first walked through the door. Theo was watching too. His hands were folded again. His back was straight. Elliot sat back down across from them. For a moment, no one spoke. Outside, 42 floors below, the city continued to do what cities do, enormous and indifferent, and carrying inside it, at any given moment, more stories than could ever be counted or contained. Most of them never intersected. Most of the people down there would live their entire lives without ever being in the same room as someone else whose life was being decided at that exact moment. Today in this room, 3 people were in exactly that position. A man of 71 who had built something large and complex, and who was only now understanding how much of the architecture of his own safety he had taken on faith. A woman who had been waking at 4 in the morning for years to do the things that needed doing because there was no one else to do them. And a boy who had stopped twice on a staircase to catch his breath and had gotten up both times. Mrs. Wynne, Elliot said, I want you to understand something about what is going to happen next. When this is over, when the people responsible for this morning have been identified and dealt with, the 2 of you cannot return to your apartment and resume as though nothing happened. The men who arranged this will know by tonight that it failed. They will look at the camera footage. They will see Theo in the catering hallway. They will understand what happened. Nora looked at him steadily. What are you proposing? She said. I have a property in Virginia, 3 hours from here. It is staffed and it is secure. There is a good school within 10 minutes of it that I have supported privately for several years. I would like the 2 of you to go there tonight. My driver will take you. You will be guests. You will stay as long as necessary. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at Theo, then back at Elliot. And after, she said, After Elliot said, "We will have a different conversation," she nodded once. It was the kind of nod that does not contain everything the person is thinking, but contains the most important thing, which is the decision. Theo looked at his mother, then at Elliot. "Sir," he said quietly, "are you going to be all right?" The question came without preamble, not performed, not angled for effect, just asked the way a child asks a thing when the child genuinely wants to know the answer. Elliot looked at him. "Yes," he said, "I'm going to be all right." He said it the way he said things when he meant them precisely and had thought about them before he spoke. Not as reassurance, not as the thing you say to a child to stop them from worrying, but as a statement of something he believed to be true based on the evidence available to him at this particular moment. The phone on the desk buzzed again. Conrad. Elliot crossed to it and picked up. "I have the financial trail," Conrad said. $2.1 million. Moved through the medical division vendor accounts over 7 months, beginning 6 weeks after Rabe's removal from the partnership. Disguised inside legitimate supplier invoices, small amounts spread across 17 separate transactions, each one below the internal audit threshold. Professional-grade concealment, not amateur work. Stewart's signature. On the invoice approvals, all of them. He would have known what he was signing. Elliot was quiet. "There is one more thing," Conrad said. His voice changed slightly, lower, more careful. "Stewart's daughter, 14 years old, she was diagnosed 18 months ago with a degenerative condition. I'm not going to go into the specifics because they don't change the facts of what he did. But the treatment program she's enrolled in cost approximately $180,000 annually. Their insurance covers 60%. Stewart has been covering the remainder." A pause. "Until 7 months ago, he was covering it from personal savings. Then the payments from the medical vendor account started, and the personal withdrawals stopped." Elliot stood at the desk with the phone at his ear. He thought about a man sitting in a hospital room beside a 14-year-old girl. A man who had built 25 years of a career on being reliable and steady and present. A man who had sat in a kitchen after a funeral and poured 2 glasses of whiskey and asked for nothing. A man who had watched the savings run out and had made a decision that could not be unmade, and that had put him in a restaurant in Wilmington with 2 men he would not have shared a meal with under any other circumstances. None of it changed what had been in that cup. None of it made the morning different. But it changed the shape of Stuart Aldrin. It made him something other than a straightforward villain, which in Elliot's experience was the way most betrayals actually worked. Not clean, not simple, constructed out of desperation and bad judgment, and the terrible arithmetic of a person who has run out of options they can live with and has begun reaching for ones they can't. "Does he know we know?" Elliot asked. "Not yet," Conrad said. "Keep it that way for now." He set the phone down. He looked at the window, at the river, at the city that had been going about its business all morning, while this particular morning unfolded in a room 42 floors above it. He thought about what he needed to do next. Conrad would want him to call the authorities, would want the process to proceed through the correct channels in the correct order, which was what Conrad was built for, and what 11 years of working together had taught Elliot to value. But before any of that, Elliot needed to do one thing that was not on Conrad's list. One thing Conrad would not agree with. One conversation that needed to happen in this building in this day between 2 people who had known each other long enough that the ending of that knowledge deserved to be done in person and not by the arrival of investigators at an office door. He would call Conrad back in 20 minutes. But first there was a name on a list on the 40th floor of this building, and Elliot Marsh had something to say to him. Conrad had said 20 minutes. Elliot gave himself 5. He stood at the window one last time and looked at the river. The barge he had been watching all morning was long gone, now disappeared around the southern bend carrying whatever it carried to wherever it was going. The sky had not changed, still pale, still flat. The kind of October sky that does not commit to anything, that simply holds the city underneath it without comment and lets what happens underneath it happen. He thought about what he was about to do. Conrad would call it unnecessary, would call it a risk, would present him with 3 or 4 logical reasons why the correct sequence of events required the authorities to be involved before any direct contact was made with a suspect, and all 3 or 4 of those reasons would be entirely valid and would also, in Elliot's considered judgment, miss the point. He was going to do it anyway. Not because he was reckless. He had not built what he had built by being reckless. He was going to do it because 9 years of shared work and one evening in a kitchen after a funeral and 11 hours on a plane coming back from Singapore had earned Stuart Aldrin a conversation before it became something that could not be walked back from. Not an escape, not a negotiation, just a conversation. The kind that two people owe each other when they have been inside the same work for long enough that ending it without words would be its own kind of dishonesty. He turned from the window. Nora and Theo were still on the sofa. Nora had her hands folded in her lap. Theo had leaned slightly into her side, not dramatically, just the small allowable fraction, and was looking at the floor with the particular expression of a child who is very tired but will not say so, because saying so would mean admitting that the morning had cost him something. "Mrs. Wynne," Elliot said, "I need to go downstairs for a short while. Conrad, my colleague, will be back in this office within the next few minutes. I want you and Theo to stay here until I return. Don't open the door for anyone except him. You know what he looks like." Nora looked at him. "How long?" she asked. "Not long," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded. Elliot took his jacket from the back of the chair and put it on. He straightened it once. He did not take anything else. He walked to the door and locked it and stepped into the hallway. The 40th floor was 3 floors below, 2 minutes by the south stairwell. He took the stairs. The stairwell was the same stairwell that Theo had climbed less than 3 hours ago. The same gray concrete, the same industrial light, the same quiet that exists in the spaces of a building that most people in the building never use. Elliot descended it slowly, one hand on the rail, and thought about a 10-year-old boy climbing upward through this same space, stopping twice on these same landings to catch his breath, choosing each time to keep going. He thought about James Wynne pulling a bus to the curb. He pushed through the door onto the 40th floor. Stuart Aldrin's office was at the northwest corner, a position he had occupied for 9 years, and which Elliot had always privately noted had one of the better views in the building. Not as high as the 42nd floor, but angled in a way that caught the afternoon light off the water differently, particularly in autumn, particularly in the hour before the sun dropped behind the buildings on the opposite bank. Stuart had never mentioned the view. He was not the kind of man who mentioned views. He was the kind of man who arrived before everyone else and left after everyone else and kept his desk cleaner than anyone Elliot had ever worked with, which Elliot had always taken as a sign of a particular kind of discipline. The discipline of a man who had decided early on that his value lay in his reliability and who had organized his entire professional life around the maintenance of that reputation. He walked down the corridor without stopping at the reception desk. The door to Stuart's office was closed. Elliot knocked once, pushed it open, and went in. Stuart Aldrin was at his desk. He was not on the phone. He was not reviewing documents. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him, very still, as though keeping them there required effort. He was not doing anything. He was simply occupying the physical space of his office, while everything he was actually thinking about was somewhere else entirely. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a very long time and had finally stopped pretending otherwise. He looked up when Elliot came in. Something happened in his face. It was not guilt exactly. It was more specific than that. It was the face of a man who has been waiting for a particular knock on a particular door for a particular number of hours, and who, when it finally comes, feels something that is almost closer to relief than to fear. Because the waiting is over. Because the version of the day that existed before the knock, the unbearable suspension of it, the not knowing when it was coming, only knowing that it was, is finally finished. He had known by some internal clock that Elliot could not see that this moment was coming. Maybe he had known since 8:13 this morning. Maybe he had known longer than that. Elliot closed the door behind him. He crossed the office without speaking. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and took out the photograph that Conrad had placed on his desk earlier, the one taken 3 weeks ago at a restaurant in Wilmington, the one that showed 3 men at a corner table, all of them laughing, none of them looking at a camera because none of them believed a camera was there. He set it on the desk in front of Stuart Aldrin. He did not sit down. He did not say anything. Stuart looked at the photograph for a long time, long enough that the silence in the room became something with weight and texture, something that occupied the space between them. The way furniture occupies a room, you could feel it. You had to move around it. It was not going anywhere on its own. Then Stewart said something that Elliot had not expected. He did not deny it. He did not look up from the photograph and begin constructing an explanation. He did not reach for the phone. He did not do any of the things that a person does when they intend to fight what is coming. He said very quietly, "They told me it was only a warning." Elliot waited. "Rabe said they were going to frighten you, make you feel vulnerable. He said you'd be sick enough to step back from the company to bring in new leadership to give him the opening he needed to renegotiate his exit terms. That was what they told me." Another silence. He said no one would get hurt. Elliot looked at him, at the face he had known for 9 years, at the lines around the eyes that had deepened in the past year or two, at the way Stewart's hands remained flat on the desk, very still, as though he had decided that the only control he had left was over what his hands did. "Did you believe him?" Elliot said. Stewart looked up from the photograph for the first time since Elliot had set it down. He held Elliot's gaze for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. And that was the answer, not a confession exactly, but the thing that a confession is made of the moment when the version of events a person has been telling themselves collapses, and the version underneath it, the one they have been working very hard not to look at directly, becomes unavoidable. He had not believed Rabe. Not entirely. Not in the part of himself where he was still the man who had built a career on knowing what financial instruments actually contained underneath their labels. He had accepted the explanation because accepting it was easier than confronting what he already understood at some level was the truth that a man like Victor Crane did not get hired to deliver warnings, and that the coffee on a Tuesday morning was not going to make a 71-year-old man with a known cardiac history sick enough to step back from his company. It was going to make him dead, and the death certificate was going to say heart attack, and no one was going to ask a single follow-up question. Stewart had known that. He had looked at what he knew and he had made a decision about it, and the decision had been to accept the easier version because the alternative was unbearable, and because he had run out of alternatives that weren't. "Your daughter," Elliot said. Stewart's face changed then. Not a crumpling, not a breakdown, but something that moved through his expression like a current through water, a brief and total disruption of whatever had been holding him together through the morning, through all the hours since 8:13, through all the hours of waiting. "She is not a reason," he said quietly. "I know that. Don't think I don't know that." "I'm not asking you to justify it," Elliot said. "I am asking you whether, if I had known about her situation, if you had come to me the way I believed you could always come to me, any of this would have been necessary." Stewart said nothing. "Is that a conversation you thought you couldn't have with me?" The silence that followed was a different kind. Not the heavy presence of before, something more painful. The silence of a man sitting with the specific weight of a door he did not open when he should have in a moment that is now passed into the category of things that cannot be undone. "I didn't want you to see it," Stewart said finally. "I didn't want to be the person who needed help. Not from you. Not like that." Elliot stood with that for a moment. He understood it. He did not agree with it. But he understood the architecture of it, the particular pride of a man who had spent his professional life being the most reliable person in the room, who had made his value out of being the one who carried things, rather than the one who needed carrying, and who had encountered a situation that required him to be the second thing, and had found when the moment came that he simply could not do it. And so he had found another way. None of it changed what had been in the cup. None of it changed what was going to happen next. But it meant that when Elliot spoke again, he did not speak with anger. He did not have anger exactly. He had something colder and more precise than anger, something that had been building since the moment Conrad had set the list on his desk, and the fourth name had stopped him. A clarity about the cost of trust misplaced, and the weight of the thing that had almost happened this morning, and the particular magnitude of what a 10-year-old boy had prevented by choosing not to look away. He spoke the way you speak to someone you have known long enough to know the difference between who they are and what they did, and to understand that those two things are not always the same, and that knowing the difference does not mean excusing the second one. "Stewart," he said, "call your lawyer. Tell him everything. Tell him you are cooperating fully. Tell him to be here within the hour." Stewart looked at him. "That is all I am going to say to you," Elliot said. Everything else is going to be handled by people whose job it is to handle it. But I want you to call the lawyer first, and I want you to do it now while I am still in this room so that I know you understand what I'm telling you." A long moment passed. Then Stuart Aldrin reached for the phone on his desk. Elliot watched him dial, watched him speak 3 sentences into the receiver quietly, precisely, with the same economy of language he had applied to everything in 9 years of shared work. The same voice, the same measured delivery, as though some part of the professional apparatus remained intact, even when everything surrounding it had come apart. Then he set the phone down and looked at Elliot and nodded once. Elliot picked up the photograph from the desk. He did not say anything else. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the corridor. Behind him, the door clicked shut. He stood in the hallway for a moment. The corridor was ordinary. Carpet, fluorescent light, the distant sound of keyboards and a phone ringing somewhere around the corner. The entirely normal surface of a building that had no idea what was happening inside it today, and would have no idea tomorrow, and would continue in this way as buildings do, carrying the weight of what occurred inside it without visible record. He took the south stairwell back to 42. He climbed the same 4 flights that Theo had climbed in the opposite direction that morning. He did not stop twice on the landings, but he did slow down on the second landing and stand there for a moment in the gray concrete quiet, and he thought about a boy with worn-down shoes climbing toward him through the same stairwell, breathing hard, choosing to keep going, stopping to wash his hands so he would look right when he got there. Then he continued up. Conrad was already there when Elliot returned. He was standing in the center of the office with his phone in his hand and an expression on his face that communicated without words that he had deduced approximately what had just happened on the 40th floor and had a number of things to say about it, that he was for the moment choosing not to say because the moment for saying them had passed, and what remained now was only what came next. Nora and Theo were still on the sofa. "Well," Conrad said. "He's cooperating," Elliot said. "His lawyer will be here within the hour." Conrad held his gaze for a moment. The expression on his face did not change exactly, but something in it acknowledged what it was acknowledging and moved on. "I'll call Sandoval," he said. Detective Marguerite Sandoval had been a contact of Conrad's since his bureau days, a 20-year veteran of the Financial Crimes Division who had quietly assisted on 2 previous matters involving Marsh Capital and who had the particular gift of being able to move quickly when the evidence was already assembled and handed to her, and of asking precisely the right number of questions, which in Elliot's experience was 17, not one more, not one fewer. "Give me 20 minutes to brief her before she arrives," Conrad said. "I want her to have everything before she walks through the door." "Fine," Elliot said. Conrad stepped to the far side of the office and made the call. Elliot sat down, not at the desk. In the armchair across from the sofa, the position he had occupied twice already today, and which had, over the course of the morning, become the place where the conversations that mattered happened. He looked at Theo, who was watching him with the steady attention that had not wavered once across the entire morning. "It's going to be all right," Elliot said. Not to the room, to Theo specifically. The boy nodded, a small, serious nod. The kind that says, "I believe you," and also "I already knew that," and also "I am glad you said it anyway." Detective Sandoval arrived at 2:15. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, with close-cut hair and a manner so understated that she could have been mistaken for almost any other professional in the building until you watched her for 5 minutes and understood that the understatement was entirely deliberate and extremely effective. She reviewed Conrad's materials in the conference room on 42. She asked 17 questions. She made 4 calls. Then she stood up and said with the kind of brevity Elliot had always appreciated in people who understood their jobs, "We'll have Crane within 24 hours. At 6:15 that evening, Stuart Aldrin was escorted from his office on the 40th floor by 2 officers who came through the corridor without announcement and departed the same way. He walked with them without resistance. He did not look up as he passed the desk where his assistant was sitting. He did not look back at the office he had occupied for 9 years at the northwest corner, with its view of the water and the light that came off it differently in autumn. Elliot was not on that floor when it happened. He had returned to his own office and was sitting at his desk looking at nothing in particular when Conrad came up the stairs and stood in the doorway and said simply, "It's done." 2 words. That was all it took to close 9 years. At 7:20 that same evening, Clifton Robbie was apprehended at a hotel in Wilmington, Delaware, the same city where the prepaid phone had been purchased, where the restaurant photograph had been taken, where the holding companies had been registered. He had not yet checked out. His bag was still packed. It was not clear whether he had been waiting for confirmation that the plan had succeeded or had simply not yet decided which direction to run in. Either way, the decision was made for him. The following morning, Victor Crane was stopped at the Canadian border in a rental car registered to a name that did not exist. The prepaid phone was in the glove compartment. He had not turned it on in 18 hours. But he had not thrown it away either, which Conrad noted later was the kind of mistake that professional people make when they are moving too quickly and are more shaken than they allow themselves to admit. The thing you have been carrying becomes harder to release the longer you have carried it. Theo identified Crane's face from a photograph that same morning in a room that was not a police station through a process that Conrad had arranged with Sandoval so that the boy would not have to go anywhere unfamiliar or sit across from anyone who frightened him. He looked at the photograph for about 4 seconds and said, "Yes, that's him," in the same quiet voice he had used the first time he had said anything in this building, and then he asked whether he could have another bottle of chocolate milk. His testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Not because it was the most technically complex piece of evidence. The financial trail and the camera footage and the phone records constituted a more elaborate architecture of proof, the kind that took months to assemble and years to untangle in court. But because a jury, any jury, would look at a 10-year-old boy who had climbed 4 flights of stairs on his birthday to prevent a murder and would understand something about the weight of what he had seen and the courage it had taken to act on it in a way that no spreadsheet of vendor invoices could communicate. Sandoval said as much to Elliot 3 weeks later in a brief phone call. "He's going to be fine on the stand," she said. "He's the clearest witness I've worked with in 15 years, and I include adults in that." Elliot did not doubt it. The property in Virginia was a house that Elliot had not visited regularly in almost 3 years. It sat on 40 acres of gentle land southwest of Charlottesville, with a pond at the back of the grounds and a wood beyond the pond and a covered porch along the south side of the house that caught the afternoon light in a way that Eleanor had loved from the first day she saw it. They had bought it together the year before she got sick with the idea of spending more time there in the years that were supposed to follow the quieter years, the years without the constant pressure of the next deal and the next trip and the next crisis demanding resolution. They had made it to the property 6 times in the 2 years between the purchase and her diagnosis. After she died, Elliot had kept it because getting rid of it seemed like a larger decision than he was equipped to make at the time, and because Margaret, the woman who had managed the property since before they bought it, who had worked for the previous owners for 11 years before that, had simply continued to be there, keeping it in the condition it would have been in if people were coming, and Elliot had not had the heart to tell her to stop. Nora and Theo arrived on a Tuesday evening exactly 1 week after the morning that had started all of this. Anthony, who had been driving for Elliot for 7 years, brought them down in the dark blue car that Elliot used for longer trips, the one with the comfortable back seat that Elliot mostly read in. He called Elliot when they arrived. "They're here," he said. "The boy fell asleep outside Fredericksburg and didn't wake up until the driveway." "Good," Elliot said. "Margaret made dinner," Anthony said. "I think she made enough for 8 people." "She always does," Elliot said. He called the property that evening and spoke to Nora briefly. She thanked him. He told her there was nothing to thank him for. She told him with the particular directness he had come to recognize in their short acquaintance as simply the way she spoke clearly, without the softening that people applied to observations when they were more concerned with comfort than with truth, that there was in fact quite a lot to thank him for, and that she was going to do it whether he was comfortable with it or not. He told her to sleep. She said she would try. She slept with the lamp on for the first 4 nights. Margaret mentioned it without being asked, in the quiet way she mentioned things that she thought Elliot should know, not as alarm, just as information, the kind of detail that told you something true about how a person was doing. By the end of the 2nd week, the lamp was off. Theo finished the book he had been reading in the break room on the 38th floor. He had been on chapter 6 within 2 days of arriving at the property. Then he found the small library off the sitting room, a room that Elliot had filled with books over 2 decades with no particular system. Just things he had read or intended to read or had been given by people he respected. Theo worked through it methodically, reading in the mornings after breakfast and in the evenings before bed, and by the 4th week had finished 7 books, which Margaret also mentioned, and which she described as the most used that room had seen in years. In the afternoons, when the weather permitted, Theo went down to the pond. Anthony had produced from somewhere that was never fully explained a fishing rod and a small tackle box and had given them to Theo on the second Sunday as though it were a perfectly ordinary thing to do, which in Anthony's experience of children, it apparently was. Theo had never fished before. Anthony had never particularly liked fishing either, which meant that the two of them sat beside the pond most afternoons in a companionable ignorance of the finer points of the activity, which seemed in both their assessments not to matter very much. What mattered was the sitting, the water, the particular quality of an afternoon that has no agenda. Elliot drove down on Sundays. The first Sunday, he sat with Nora on the porch and drank coffee that he had watched Margaret make standing beside her in the kitchen while she did it, which Margaret had accepted without comment, because she had known him long enough to understand that some things shift without requiring explanation, and that the right response to a shift like that is to simply accommodate it and move on. They talked about practical things, security arrangements, the timeline of the legal proceedings, what Theo's school situation would be when they eventually returned to the city. The second Sunday, they talked less about practical things. Nora told him about James, her husband Theo's father. Not the broad outline that Elliot already knew, but the particular texture of him. The way he had insisted on reading the newspaper in physical form every morning, because he said reading things on a screen made him feel like the words might disappear. The way he had a specific laugh for things that were actually funny, as distinct from the polite version he used in social situations, and how you could tell the difference immediately because the real one involved his whole face, and the polite one did not reach his eyes. The way he had, in the last weeks before the heart attack that eventually killed him, been studying quietly for a real estate license because he wanted to give Nora and Theo something that would outlast his driving career. He never got to take the exam, she said, not with bitterness, just as a fact stated in the way that facts are stated when you have lived with them long enough that the grief inside them has become something you carry rather than something that stops you. Did you know he was going to do it? Elliot asked. He showed me the study materials the week before he died. He'd been working on it quietly for 4 months. He didn't tell me because he didn't want to say it until he was sure he'd go through with it. She looked out at the pond where Theo and Anthony were sitting in the late afternoon light. That was just like him, she said. He didn't announce things. He just did them. Elliot thought about that for a while. He thought about the things he had announced over the years in boardrooms and in press releases and in the careful public architecture of a career built to be seen. And he thought about the things he had done quietly, without telling anyone, that had mattered more than most of the announced things, the foundation he had set up in Eleanor's name, that he had never put his own name on the employee scholarship fund that distributed money every year without a ceremony or a press release. The 3 people he had helped through crises that were never mentioned in any of the profiles that business journalists wrote about him. He thought about what it cost a person to do good things quietly, and what it said about them that they kept doing it anyway. On the 4th Sunday, Margaret told him on the phone before he drove down that the property felt like a home again. She said it without elaboration. It was enough. On the 6th Sunday, Elliot brought a folder. He had been carrying it for 2 weeks, rearranging what was inside it, thinking about how to say what he needed to say, revising the figures and then revising them again, because he understood that this particular conversation required more care than most, and that getting it wrong would be worse than saying nothing. Some conversations can be corrected after the fact. Some cannot. This one was the second kind. He sat with Nora on the porch in the afternoon. November had arrived fully now. The leaves on the trees beyond the pond had moved through their colors and were settling into the deep, honest brown that comes after all the spectacular color is finished, after all the red and gold and amber that everyone notices has fallen away, and what remains is the thing underneath, the thing that stays. Theo was down at the pond with Anthony. He had caught something the previous Sunday, a small bass that he had returned to the water immediately, and he had been attempting to repeat the achievement with the focused determination that he apparently applied to most things he decided were worth doing. Elliot set the folder on the small table between their chairs. He did not open it. "Mrs. Wynne," he said, "I have been thinking about what I owe you. I have been thinking about it for 6 weeks. I don't believe there is a number that would be the correct number. But there are things I can do, and I want your permission to do them." She looked at the folder. She did not reach for it. "I want to pay for Theo's education from this point forward at whatever school he chooses for, as long as he wants to be in school. I want to establish a trust in his name structured so that it does not depend on me being alive to administer it. And I want to offer you a position within Marsh Capital at any level that interests you at whatever salary you determine is appropriate. He paused. If you prefer not to work within the company, I would like to ensure that the two of you are never again in the position of worrying about whether the rent is covered. On a monthly basis without condition for as long as you choose to accept it. Nora was quiet for a moment. She looked at the folder. Then she looked at the pond where Theo had just stood up from his chair and was saying something to Anthony that made Anthony put his head back and laugh in the way that people laugh when they are genuinely surprised by something. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I do not need your money." She said it without resentment, as a plain statement of a thing she had established over a long time, through circumstances that had required her to establish it repeatedly and without the assistance of anyone who might have made the establishing easier. "I have never needed anyone's money. I have needed enough to keep my son fed and warm and in school, and I have always found a way to manage that. So I am not going to take the position, and I am not going to take the monthly arrangement." A pause. "But I will let you pay for his school, because that is for him and not for me. And I will accept the trust, because his father would have wanted him to have something his father could not provide." She turned and looked at Elliot directly. "And I will accept your Sundays, for as long as you want to bring them." Elliot looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said. They sat for a moment in the particular silence that exists between two people who have said what needed to be said and do not need to add anything to it. The silence that is not empty but full, that contains everything the conversation has been building toward and lets it settle without disturbing it. Then Nora looked at him with the directness that by now Elliot had come to understand was simply the way she saw things. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "The morning this all happened, when Theo told you to check the coffee, you set it down without drinking it. You believed him immediately. A stranger. A child." She paused. "Why?" Elliot thought about it. He did not answer immediately because the question deserved the time it took to find the honest answer rather than the convenient one. The convenient answer was something about instinct, about experience, about knowing when something was wrong. The honest answer was older than that. "My father," he said finally, I was 10 years old. I went to tell him something was wrong. He believed me without asking whether I was sure. He just stood up and said, 'Show me.'" He looked at the pond. "I think about that more than most things from when I was young. The not being questioned, being believed the first time. I have tried for most of my adult life to do that for other people. I have not always succeeded. But this morning when Theo was standing in the doorway, I remembered what it felt like to be 10 years old and to have something important to say and to have someone simply listen." He was quiet for a moment. "So I listened." Nora nodded slowly. "James was the same way with Theo," she said. "He used to say the most important thing you can do for a child is let them know their eyes work." Elliot was quiet. "His eyes work," he said. "Yes," she said. "They do." Below them at the edge of the pond, Theo had sat back down. He had recast his line. The water was perfectly still in the late afternoon. The light was coming across the surface at the angle that turned it briefly gold. The particular gold of November light different from October gold, quieter, more earned before the sun moved and it went back to its ordinary color. Anthony was sitting beside him. Neither of them was talking. They were just sitting doing the thing that fishing mostly is, which is being in a quiet place with someone whose company you do not need to fill with words. Elliot watched them. He thought about the morning 6 weeks ago, the 42nd floor, the white cup, the 4 words from a doorway. He thought about the 9 years of Tuesdays that had preceded it and the 10,000 small things he had moved through without looking up, and the particular and dangerous comfort of trusting the structures you have built so completely that you stop examining what is inside them. He thought about how close the morning had come to ending differently, how 8 minutes was all that had separated Victor Crane's exit from the South Service entrance and a cup of coffee cooling on a marble table. 8 minutes. He thought about Stuart Aldrin sitting very still at a desk on the 40th floor, waiting for a knock on a door he knew was coming. He thought about Clifton Rabe in a hotel room in Wilmington with a bag that was already packed waiting for confirmation that never came. He thought about a boy in a catering hallway, standing very still behind a steel cart, watching a man count drops into a white cup, and understanding, without anyone having to tell him, that what he was watching was not something he was allowed to look away from. He thought about what it takes to see something clearly. and what it takes having seen it to act. He drove back to the city that evening as the last of the light was leaving the water. The highway was quiet. The fields on either side of the road were the deep November brown that follows after all the color is gone, the landscape stripped back to its bones honest, in the way that only things from which everything unnecessary has been removed can be honest. He drove with the radio off, which was not something he usually did because the silence felt like the right thing, and he had learned somewhat late in his life to pay attention to what the right thing felt like when he encountered it, rather than reaching immediately for something else to fill the space with. He took the stairs the next morning, all 42 flights. He had started doing this the week after everything happened, and he had continued, not because it was efficient, it was not efficient. It added 11 minutes to a morning that was already full. But because it turned out that 42 flights of stairs at 6 in the morning, in the same stairwell where a 10-year-old boy had stopped twice to catch his breath and kept going both times, produced a kind of clarity that the elevator did not. On the 14th floor, he passed a woman named Clara, who cleaned the offices on 13 through 16, and who he had walked past by his own rough estimate, somewhere between 100 and 200 times over 9 years, without acknowledging. He stopped. "Good morning," he said. She looked at him, surprised. Not frightened, just surprised the way people are surprised when something they did not expect turns out to be a simple and ordinary thing that requires nothing from them except acknowledgement. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Elliot Marsh," he said. "I work on 42. I should have said hello a long time ago." She smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that happens when someone means it and is not performing it. "I know who you are, Mr. Marsh," she said. "I'm Clara Hewitt." "Clara," he said. "Good to know your name." He continued up the stairs. He did this every morning after that. He learned the name of the man who made the coffee in the kitchen on 42, a quiet man named Gerald who had worked there for 6 years and who Elliot discovered had been brewing the same dark roast every Tuesday morning because someone had noted the preference in the staff log 9 years ago, and Gerald had simply continued it without anyone asking him to. He learned the name of the woman who ran the mail distribution on 31. He learned the name of the security officer who worked the lobby desk at night, a man named Edward who had a son applying to engineering school and who worked the night shift because the day rate at a second job he held across town did not align with the morning schedule, and who had been nodding back at Elliot for 6 years from behind a desk that Elliot had walked past without stopping. He started knowing the names. It was not a large thing. It did not require more than a moment usually. A stop on a staircase, a pause in a corridor, a second of attention directed at a person who had been there all along, visible to anyone who chose to look. It did not change the company. It did not resolve the Phoenix acquisition or simplify the board meeting on Thursday. It did not bring Eleanor back or undo what Stuart Aldrin had done or restore the 9 years of misplaced certainty. But it changed the building, not the walls or the floors or the 42 flights of stairs. The understanding inside it, the way a building feels when the person at the top of it has begun to register the people inside it as something other than background. Most things that matter, Elliot had come to understand, are not large things. They are the decision to check what is in the cup before you drink it, to climb the stairs when the elevator is not safe, to stop twice when you cannot breathe and keep going both times, to wash your hands with lemon soap because you want to look right when you say the thing that needs to be said. They are a father who feels his heart failing behind the wheel of a bus and pulls it over before he does anything else, because the people in his care come before the fact of his own dying. They are a mother who stands in a kitchen before 5 in the morning making blueberry pancakes because it is her son's birthday, and she will not let the schedule take that from him. They are a boy who sees something that does not look right and does not look away, even when looking away would be easier, even when keeping going requires stopping twice and starting again. They are 4 words spoken quietly by a 10-year-old boy standing in a doorway with both hands on the frame on the morning of his birthday in a building where no one had ever learned his name. Pay attention to the small voices. Learn the names of the people who are already there, who have always been there in the hallways and the stairwells and the rooms you pass through without looking up. Because the most important person in your life today may be someone whose name is not yet on your calendar. And sometimes all it takes to change the entire course of a life is the willingness to stop and look up and listen.